Hello and welcome to the Political Orphanage, a home for plucky misfits and problem solvers. I'm your host, Andrew Heaton, and today's episode went differently than I anticipated. I've had today's guest, Scott Klug, on the show a couple of times previously. I very much like him. I think we've got pretty similar political bearings, and I love talking to him. And so I thought, when I brought up incentive problems in Washington, members of Congress making buckets of money lobbying after they leave office, deep-pocketed political donors purchasing votes from senators, and representatives with insider knowledge buying individual stocks, I thought Scott would get angry with me, flip over a table, and then we would enjoy a wonky, technocratic conversation about how to Rube Goldberg our way to neutering feckless politicians. Instead, Scott responds to a lot of the problems that I bring up by saying, it's not actually a problem. The thing that I assume is a big, glaring conflict of interest or an invitation for bribery isn't. It's an interesting episode from the perspective of a former member of Congress and lobbyist right here on The Political Orphanage. My guest today is Scott Klug. He is a former congressman from Wisconsin. He is the host of the Lost in the Middle, America's Political Orphans podcast. And he's also on Substack and just a guy I very much enjoy talking to and a frequent or at least repeat guest on the program. Scott, good to see you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Well, we dwindling libertarians need to hang out together, so I'm glad to be back on.
Yeah, I'm going to say both classical liberals and moderates are not in an upswing moment in American history, because I view myself as temperamentally moderate, by which I mean I want to build coalitions with people. I could be wrong about stuff. I'm willing to compromise, and I generally assume other people have good intentions. We're arguing about methodology, not whether they're an evil shitbag. That's me as a temperamental moderate. And then classically liberal, peace, prosperity, pluralism, individual rights, skepticism of government. I don't think either of those are really great positions to be in at present.
Yeah, I think we all sort of feel the drift, and I keep hoping it will come back, but it's hard to figure out what 4 years from now is going to bring. Hopefully not one of the Trump kids.
Yeah, I would.
Although I bought a lot of
that.
their coins just in case.
Oh yeah, good, nice. That's right. I should. You know what? I need to expand my Roth IRA to include a little bit of political exposure for meme coins and invest in Trump Mobile. If we do that, well, speaking of Scott, potentially corrupt practices that exist in government, I wanted to talk to you today specifically about corruption and or bad incentives that exist in Congress, things that we could tweak that would go for better government. So to kick it off, let's say I decide I'm going to take up your mantle. I move to Wisconsin. I take up your old seat. I become a member of Congress. But then after that, I'm just in it for the money. If I just wanted to make money as a member of Congress, what would I do that I could pull off legally to maximize my income presently?
Well, first of all, you'd have to decide what committees you want to be on. And the committees will have a lot to do with your ability to hire yourself out in the future. Says a guy who actually worked for a large national law firm running their federal lobbying practice for 20 years.
Okay.
So, I sort of get it. But, the demand is really on the outside for people who have business expertise. So, for example, I was on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and we did telecommunication, healthcare, energy policy. We actually had jurisdiction over time, which is an interesting concept that's written in our responsibilities. We had responsibility for the U.S. naval clock, which has the official timekeeper of the United States. The other place to go is the Ways and Means Committee, affectionately referred to because they figure out the ways and means to get in your pocket. It's the tax committee. Uh-huh. The problem with Ways and Means is often there's not a tax bill. Tax bills sort of happen every once or 4 or 8 years. They're not frequent. So the amount of stuff that's actually going on in the Ways and Means Committee is eliminated. I think the old days, that you really want to do is to go on the Appropriations Committee. And I've always told people there are 3 political parties in Washington, Republicans, Democrats, and people on the Appropriations Committee, because they're folks whose entire political career is driven by delivering stuff back home, a bridge, an overpass, a train station, all that sort of stuff. And for example, you could make a really good career representing colleges and universities who are trying to get appropriated grants for projects, new chemistry building, all that sort of brick and brack. But as the appropriations money has sort of gotten squeezed, that's not quite the sort of golden rainbow it once used to be. So the answer is when you leave, if you're a member of Congress and now senior staff, you actually have a year cool-off period. For a while, it was you couldn't contact Congress. Now I think it's that you also can't contract the administration. So you're sort of blocked in a lot of directions. So you've got a year where you're in the penalty box. Now, here's how the scam works. So I can't lobby, but I can get my firm hired to be the lobbyist for somebody and then look at Mike and Carol, who are former congressional staffers, and say, well, here's our new assignment and get it done. So it really doesn't necessarily block you from directing work. It blocks you for having direct face-to-face contact with members. So that's sort of the post-exit world. It's interesting because people think members stay a lot longer than they do. I think the average length of stay in the House is still only 6 to 7 years. You have to serve. Oh, really? You have to serve 6 years, 3 terms of 2 years each in order to get to qualify for a pension. So folks will usually stick around if they can to 3, but there's a huge incentive. Like I was a term limit guy, so I said no more than 12 and I left after 8. There's a lot of up and out. There's a natural progression. If you want to stay there, do you want to go to the Senate? Do you want to go be a governor? There's a lot of people who just don't like it. There was a guy in my class, Charlie Lukens, who was the mayor of Cincinnati, who got elected, and his dad had been the mayor of Cincinnati for, 10 years, 20 years, I don't know, for a hell of a long time. And literally like 3 months into the job, I was out with Charlie and John Boehner because they both represented. Boehner was in Ohio, but he was across the river basically from where Charlie's district was in Cincinnati. And I can remember Charlie looking up one night over a pizza, maybe 4 months into the job, and he said, I can't do this. This is the same thing my dad did to me when I was a kid. I'm never around. I never see my kids. I can't do that. So it actually splinters much more broadly than you think. There are many more folks, if they do what I did, which is I went back home to Wisconsin and I travel to Washington as needed. There's a more serious crowd that just stays in DC and never really sort of leaves psychically the 4-block radius around the Capitol. So there are some barriers to be able to go out the door on December and back in the door lobbying the next day.
Okay, so this is fascinating. I had not realized that it was that your post-congressional career was so specifically tied to what committees you were on. So I don't know that you've got the numbers in front of you, but generally speaking, there's a correlation with lobbyists that were on the Appropriations Committee make more money than lobbyists that were on the Veteran Affairs Committee and so forth. Because there's not a lot of demand. Take it back to your days in Oklahoma. There's not a lot of demand for agricultural lobbying. The agricultural programs tend to be set in place. And a lot of you sort of get hired by 2 groups of people. You get hired by associations. And a lot of times in Washington, you get hired by national associations. So there's a Realtors Association in Oklahoma. There's a Teachers Union Association. There's a bunch of them. So they will hire you to work on specific stuff. I never worked on associations work because it's just like being on a big committee. And because stuff in Congress moves so glacially slow, you have to be on the call Monday to tell them what you're going to do on Tuesday. And then Wednesday, you're on a call to see what you did on Tuesday and plan for Thursday. And it just eats up a lot of time. It all depends what, for example, there was a guy, John Porter, who used to be on the Appropriations Committee from Illinois. When he left, he largely represented museums because museums are always looking for grants from the National Endowment for Humanities or the National Arts Endowment. And so you can, if you still want to work the Hill, there's a million things to do. So the law firm I work for is historically based in Wisconsin, but we're in 26 cities. So I'd work with our offices all across the country to help work on different projects. So people who are the most successful in Congress, I think in a lot of ways have very short attention spans because you have so much different stuff coming at you. So I was never the guy who could tell you what section of the telecommunication business deregulated long distance calling, but I meant there are those kind of provisions out there. So if you want to do that, but I would not,
I don't want you to have the impression that most members of Congress leave and become lobbyists. You can get recruited for all kinds of things. So when I was leaving, I got recruited to be a president of a couple small colleges. And it makes sense, right? Because if you're a member of Congress, raising money is what you do when you're in office, right? To run for campaigns. Right. So it's not unnatural for you to suddenly turn around and say, well, the school needs money for, you would have been there when David, we're going to name after Andrew.
When David Boren was in the Senate from Oklahoma, you would have served coterminously with him, and David Boren left the Senate to head up the University of Oklahoma. And part of it was he was still the most powerful politician in the state even after he retired, but a lot of it was, man, did he know a lot of people with deep pockets at that point, and he could do a lot of serious fundraising for the university.
Yeah, and it's an interesting split. So Hank Brown was a Republican and went to Colorado and was a senator for, was a president of the University of Colorado for a long time. Wisconsin, interestingly, does not have that tradition. And I've had long arguments. In fact, my old CEO is now the head of the University of Wisconsin, which are not Madison or Milwaukee, but all the other campuses around the state, in Green Bay and Oshkosh, Eau Claire, La Crosse. I know to 99% of your listeners, this will sound like I'm describing the provinces in Tasmania. But anyway, I've always argued that not for the major research universities like the University of Wisconsin is, but to have somebody who can talk to state legislators who speak a whole different language, it would make sense to have a college president at one of those system schools, right? Because they can translate the language for the other presidents they're working with and with the faculty. So anyways, I got a lot of requests to be a small college president, to which I replied, you have no idea how little interest I have whether some guy makes tenure in the Department of Anthropology. I don't think you want me as your college professor. The funniest call I got was from a headhunter who wanted to know if I wanted to head up the National Public Radio. So this is the era when Newt Gingrich was around, and actually it was for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And I said, this is interesting. Have you done very much research on me? And they said, well, we sort of know your background, your recommend. Some people, I said, well, you might want to check out the bill I drafted and introduced to eliminate public funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Because why are you taking my tax dollars to buy old reruns of Masterpiece Theater, which aired 3 years ago on the BBC in England? So I didn't get that job, and I had no interest in that job. But it's interesting. So when you leave, a lot of people will go down paths that have nothing else to do with politics anymore. Some folks just go home and retire and decide they never want anything to do with politics again. So I don't want you to think of the 90 people who retired this year, 88 of them will be lobbyists in Washington. A lot of people don't like doing it.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm also surprised but believe you that the average term in Congress is not that long, because we think of the people that are there forever, like Pelosi or I forget that Southern skeleton that was in the segregationist party. I forget his name, but he was there forever.
Strom Thurmond?
Yeah, that's it, Strom Thurmond. Yeah, I saw him on a school field trip, and it was like this tiny skeleton in a suit got like pulled out by two old guys. Like he couldn't walk, but they would bring him in, and he'd go, no, and then he'd vote and he'd leave.
One of the funniest things I ever saw in my life was a speech Strom Thurmond gave towards the end of his career, because it was all written for him and it's on teleprompter. And so he delivered it, it's wonderful to be here and, in Oklahoma City. It's always glad to be back here and see my old friend, Mayor Heaton. Pause for applause. He'd like read the cue lines in the speech because he was so out of it.
He'd Ron Burgundy it. Well, yeah. I'll say with the lobbying thing, I don't have any problem with anybody leaving office and engaging in productive economic activity for which they're justly rewarded. I don't have a problem with anybody making money, right? As long as they're doing it by providing value and people are freely giving them the money, it's not predatory. I'm all in favor of everybody getting rich. I am worried as a taxpayer that you get like Jack Abramoff situations where a lobbyist comes in and goes, Scott, we would love for you to work at our lobby shop when the cool down period happens a year from now. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you $100,000 as a consultant during this inner period, during the cool off period. But then after that, just keep in mind that 2 years from now, you're looking at like $500,000 for these very specific companies and these very specific industries that we regulate, and the prospect of lobbying post-career would negatively incentivize members of Congress to make decisions based on that? That's what I'm concerned about.
Under the law, you can explore any job opportunities while you're leaving Congress. If it gets serious, you have to disclose it to the Ethics Commission within Congress to make sure you're not doing exactly what you suggested, that suddenly I'd changed my vote and now I'm completely in favor of deregulating the railroad industry or whatever it is. So there is some watchdog stuff going on. So in my class, there were 48 members, 32 Democrats and 16 Republicans. Some real interest, John Boehner, close friend of mine, we were just talking about before with Charlie Lukens when he left. Boehner went on to become the speaker. Pete Peterson was a Democrat from Florida who was a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And when they reestablished diplomatic relationships with Vietnam under Bill Clinton, he became the first U.S. ambassador to Vietnam. So a lot of very distinguished people along the way, a couple more senators, a governor or two, and 2 convicted felons, 1 Republican and 1 Democrat. And they did it the old-fashioned way. This was not like a cute lobbying, do things here. This
was money in the freezer. Yeah.
That's one of them. That's Bill Jefferson. Yeah. That's the Democrat who I played pickup basketball with and played in the congressional baseball game with and was a great guy. And for your listeners who are listening, he was the chair of the Ways and Means Subcommittee, which did tax incentives, tax breaks for African countries, because African countries exported a lot of textiles to the U.S. So when he was the chair, you'd go in to see Bill and say, look, I'm having trouble getting this deal done with the Nigerian government for an oil field somewhere. And the guy would say, well, that's great. Let's fly over there together. And on the way back, Jefferson would say, my daughter's looking for a job. My brother could use a board position, whatever it was. And he's the guy famously who the FBI did a sting on. He got $100,000 in cash. The FBI raided his house and his office, and in the freezer at his house, they found $85,000 because somehow in the intervening hour and a half, $90,000. In the intervening time, he delivered $10,000 to somebody who they never figured out. He, of course, fought it in court, spent 8 years in prison. The other guy was a Republican, Duke Cunningham. Duke was in my class, famously had written a book called Top Gun, and he was a flight instructor at Miramar. And some of the scenes in the movie are allegedly actually based on Duke's experiences in the books. Good guy, a little full of himself. It took a while for people, I think, to warm up to him just because, he stood up to run for class president. Who runs for class president? Because you're the freshman class president when you're in Congress. I mean, I guess it meant something at some point. We all looked at each other and said, I don't want that job. It's going to have to do stuff I don't want to do. So Duke stands up and says, well, I don't want to run, but I'd be honored if you consider me based on my public service. So we all sort of went. We picked the guy from Nebraska named Bill Barrett, who ran a small town bank, which was much more reflective of our class. But Duke goes on to become the chairman of the Defense Subcommittee in Appropriations. He's got a house in Southern California, in San Diego. I'm trying to put the places right. And there's a very famous hotel there. And in Coronado, which is a sort of a Tony suburb. His house goes up for sale. And his neighbors, as neighbors do everywhere, as my wife checks out to see what happens in our neighborhood on Zillow or whatever the case might be, his house sells for a lot more money than everybody thought. And all the neighbors are very excited by this because it means they can get more money when they sell their house than they thought. Except about 9 months later, the same house goes up for sale for $150,000 less because it was actually owned by a defense contractor, which is how they want the money to him. Okay. Even better was the scam that was going on where he oftentimes got paid in collectible antique furniture, which sounds really weird, except if I give you some 17th century Italian armoire, you're going to sell it to another collector, which means it's a private transaction that nobody ever sees. So he just got a little too greedy in this place, and he got 8 years too. So I got a former speaker in my class and ambassadors and governors and 2 convicted felons, 1 Republican and Democrat, and a very bipartisan statement.
I would love to come to that reunion. I will, but I'll come back to the lobbying thing though. I as a taxpayer, I am worried that if you have highly affluent lobbying positions, and even just on a subconscious level, I, as a member of Congress, am aware that there's a pretty good chance I could get a job lobbying for the telecom industry. Maybe I haven't even talked to them. Jack Abramoff has not come by. We haven't had any quid quo pro, but I'm aware, man, like I know that they're going to come ask me for a lobbying job. I'm looking at $500,000 a year. I'm going to go easy on them. That worries me from an incentive position. Do you think that is is something that we ought to be worried about? Is that something that affects the quality and the fiduciary responsibility of our representatives?
I don't think so. That's sort of still where I don't think anybody consciously builds a resume for what it's going to look like after they leave office. You can develop, the longer you're in Congress, the more narrow your expertise becomes, right? If you're the chairman of the telecommunications subcommittee, I decided to leave because I had 3 boys and I was tired of not seeing my kids enough. But I also sort of said, do I really want to stay here 20 years to be like the foremost expert in telecommunications? The guy I beat, who'd been in office in 30 years, was the chairman of the IP subcommittee on intellectual property. It's like, my God, why would if I wanted to do that, I'd been a college professor somewhere. So I think that I don't think anybody builds a portfolio where they want to go. I think you see folks who tend to end up on the more powerful committees just by nature being the most ambitious because you have to fight to get on it. And I think the ones who are on that are just naturally more aggressive in terms of their positions. It's sort of the argument Heaton about campaign contributions, because folks would always say, well, U.S. Steel gave you a campaign contribution, and that's why you changed your vote to vote for U.S. Steel. Well, I over the course of all the times you vote, it's pretty clear where you lean. Are you pro-union, pro-business, more regulatory, more libertarian? And so money usually goes to people who they get support because of the positions they've taken. They don't change their positions because of the money. So I'm going to disagree with you on that. But
wait, so can I pause you there? Because I want to make sure I understand that concept, because I think there's something to that. Like the NRA gives a lot of money to Ted Cruz. I don't think Ted Cruz was on the fence about guns. I don't think Ted was agnostic about guns, and then the NRA bribed him, and he went, well, now I'm pro-gun, but I very much could have been anti-gun if only the Brady coalition had got to my door first. Or if I'm a member of Congress and I'm not trying to maximize my money, this is just little old Andrew Heaton. Given all my political satire videos, the Chamber of Commerce would look at me and go, this guy favors a low regulatory environment. He's probably, he thinks capitalism's good. He thinks markets are efficient, and he thinks that we're overregulated. Let's put some money behind him, as opposed to me coming in and then the Chamber of Commerce comes in and goes, we'll give you some money if you deregulate stuff. Like, I was already going to do it.
Yeah, that's spot on. I think people, when you go into office, tend to have a philosophical bent, right? So needless to say, the teachers union and I were never big chums. And so there was no way in the world I was ever going to get money from the teachers union. And had they come in and said, we'll support you in the next election, it's like, well, no, I disagree with you on 90% of what you want to do. So I think those sort of relationships develop out of people's philosophy when they're in office and what stuff you're interested in. You can't know everything. Like, for example, there'd be a bill on the floor about banking, and sure, I'd hear from my banks back home, but I'd go ask a guy named Jim Leach, who was a moderate Republican from Iowa and who was on the banking committee, and say, Jim, is this good for my small banks or not good for my small banks? So you sort of have an informal network of people you lean on who feel same philosophy. Jim Ramstad represented suburban St. Paul, and Dave Camp was from Midland, Michigan. And so you sort of have an informal network of people you lean on for guidance to sort of check your own instincts and stuff. So
I have several friends that would say something to the following effect. The campaign contribution system, a donor system we have in the United States, is a form of legalized bribery that compels politicians to do the bidding of corporate donors or other very special interests. You would push back on that and say that the causality is backwards, that they were probably going to do it anyway, and that's why the people are backing them? It's not really a problem?
I think that's true. Well, one of the things I know you raised questions are about campaign funds. So now I retire from office and I have $2 million. When I first got elected,
well, actually, hold on. Can I pause you? Because I want to talk about campaign funds too. I want to run 2 quick proposals by you. Tell me why these are bad ideas. Because I'm going to simmer with this. There's a part of me that just viscerally dislikes the idea of a congressman becomes lobbyist and is sweetening the pot. Although I will think about all of your points. If you had a law in place that said, like, we take the cool down period, the year long period, and we kind of extend that and go, you cannot earn more than your congressional salary in a sum total of lobbying or political consulting for 5 years after you leave office. That seems to me that.
I thought you were a free market guy.
I am, but I'm okay. Here's the thing, Scott. I think in terms of incentives, and I can see there being bad incentives in place of, like if it's at the back of my mind that I'm nice to this particular oil company, maybe that would creep in even on a subconscious level. So if I put a rule in place saying you can't exceed your congressional salary for 5 years in political consulting or in lobbying, then I'm curious as to what you think would happen. Would you just get a lot more university presidents? Would people just use their deep pocket prowess to go into other fields, like it would push a balloon, or what do you reckon? If I propose that, how would you vote on that bill and why?
Well, I think I vote no. I mean, but here's why. Let's take it from a far more innocent perspective. So when I left office, I had breakfast one morning with Ronald Reagan's former chief of staff, Ken Duberstein. And he said, here's a few things I want you to keep in mind. Members of Congress who go and do one thing, like become the vice president of the helicopter division at Raytheon, are ready to jump out the window after about 25 days because they're not wired that way. You're used to juggling, you're multitaskers. So he said, you should think about that when you look for a job. And the second thing he said, and this actually ties into, I think, an equal point, when you go back home, you have a lot of experience that people can use. And he said, make sure you do some of that for the nonprofit sector. I don't care what it is, but you should be engaged to be useful. But in most cases, I would say better than 50% of the lobbying work I did back there, it had Wisconsin ties to it. So I don't see anything wrong whatsoever with the Wisconsin Cheesemakers Association, the Wisconsin Corn Growers, the Friends of Public TV, who I didn't work for, but of saying, we'll hire you. Can you help us get this legislation, get this bill, help us with the ag department that has this goofy regulation? I think people are willing to pay you because you bring a set of expertise and relationships to the table. And so
so previously, when you're a member of Congress, you've been elected to represent your constituency, which includes these various sectors. It includes the cheesemongers, the cheese growers. You're moving to the private sector, and now you're being employed by these same people you previously represented. Now they're paying you directly to lobby on their behalf in Congress, as opposed to represent them in Congress.
Yeah, but I mean, I think they don't hire you if you don't bring a skill set, right? So I mean, it's you've got what I always tell people when they be overwhelmed by what was going on in Congress, it's like, you don't have to know 435 people. You need to know 12 of them, 6 Republicans and 6 Democrats, and develop relationships. Because when you come out to Washington, I want you to walk in the room and they say, hey, Andrew, nice to see you again. Tell me some more about what you're concerned about in, this education bill or this tax provision or whatever it is. So I push back on that. I don't necessarily, I guess I would lean on the fact that people who do things corruptly, my 2 classmates who we talked about, get caught. And most people, it's just making arguments with people.
Yeah, it's not a huge problem. Let me try one more tact on this. I am very worried about regulatory capture. I think that happens frequently. You'll have a situation where a hotel burns down, and the American Hotel Association will come to Congress and go, we are absolutely heartbroken that this horrible event happened. We are asking you, please regulate our industry. We would love for regulation. Here's what we want to do. We want to put in, every hotel in America should have to have the exact amount of sprinkler systems Marriott currently has and the exact amount of staircases that the Hilton currently has. And it turns into this really benevolent palooza to just outlaw B&Bs. How do we stomp on the little guy and keep our market share using so because I'm really worried about regulatory capture, I am naturally worried about members of Congress leaving and then becoming lobbyists on behalf of these associations. Is the idea that this would just happen anyway? It doesn't really matter whether the former members are involved or not?
Well, you're assuming you get hired to make regulations. I probably spent get hired more frequently to try to eliminate regulations or to pull them back. I'll tell you quick story as I can. There's a woman on the Library Mall in Madison, which is the state street's closed. So from the state capitol to the University of Wisconsin's a pedestrian walkway. There's a big library. This was a woman from Ecuador who started a food cart selling empanadas, which are little like Hostess pies, only they have meat in them if you've never had one. And she's so successful, they put her product in local grocery stores in the frozen food section. The FDA comes back and says, you have to stop selling these. And she said, why? Because it says South American empanadas, and they weren't made in South America. You have to take all the product off, destroy them, repackage them with new labels. So she comes screaming at us. So I'm arguing with the FDA about this forever. So I actually was on Energy and Commerce, which has jurisdiction over the FDA. So one day we invited the deputy commissioner over food products to come to my office, where I had 4 or 5 other members of Congress on my committee were all in the room with me. And they came in and the guy opens to show me the FDA regulation book, chapter 8, subsection 7 for mislabeling food products. At which point I said, really? You're going to do this to this immigrant lady? It's like a great success story. Congressman, we'd love to, but that's what the regulations say. And at which point on cue, everybody produced from behind their chairs, French dressing, Russian dressing, Greek olives, and on it went until we had half the room filled with products. And the FDA said, okay, sorry. So what you can do is just put a little sticker on the stuff in the frozen food case that says empanada style. And then we went forward. But it was like, really? In the entire universe of what the FDA is worried about, you're singling out some lady who maybe sells 1,000 boxes of frozen empanadas a year, and you're going to put her out of business. So I just hate government regulation. Hate in capital letters, because it goes, and that's part of why I don't like the way the Trump folks handle a lot of stuff. Just the array of regulators who, because they're there, they have nothing else to do. So they regulate till it gets to the point of absurdity. She wasn't trying to fool anybody that she'd ship these in container ships from, Ecuador to get into the streets of Madison. So anyway, there's a weird little aside, but that's what I see when people talk about government and regulation. And I could tell you stories like this all night long.
So when I worked on the Hill, I started out for Dan Boren, who was a conservative Democrat from Oklahoma, who was wonderful to his interns, by the way. I started as an intern in his office, and he would do an intern program where, like, he got us to meet Antonin Scalia. He got us to meet Leon Panetta when he was the head of the CIA. And one of the guys that he brought us in to meet was a lobbyist of some kind. I don't remember, but it was a really interesting conversation where the lobbyist went, I know you all have been brought to hate us and think that we are just sort of evil people. And he went, I want to explain the following. One, I have to be registered as a lobbyist. Like, this is something that is regulated. I have to like announce that I'm doing this with whatever board does it. But then the argument that he basically made was, I represent trade groups that actually know the industry much better than the politicians that are potentially regulating it, or at least know what their needs are as a service. So like in kind of a similar way, if Congress were to think about regulating podcasting, I could get a group of podcasters together and go, look, you guys don't do podcasts. I do a podcast. I know how these regulations are going to impact us, and we would love for you to consult us on things before you go in. Now, we might, if I was going to try to be the regulatory capture guy, I would also go, we don't need any new white guys hosting podcasts. We need more diversity. Let's ban all new white guys from hosting podcasts. But on a more benign level, it might be like they want to do a podcasting licensing fee. And I'm like, look, like, I don't think it's going to improve the quality of podcasts. I think it's just going to make it harder for people to get started. So there is a certain level of lobbyists being a part of the input system that we have in a political system where you're allowed to lobby your members of Congress.
So Wisconsin is, I'm making this up, but maybe a third of the state legislatures in the country are full-time professionals. Wisconsin's one of them. But if you actually look, Florida and Texas, I may have these backwards, but like, I think it's Texas meets every other year for like 3 months.
Yeah.
And Florida's
like 6 months every 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah. And Florida's legislative session, I think, is a month. in the year, and then they adjourn. Meanwhile, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Massachusetts, if I'm on a lake in Madison, if you grabbed a boat and went across it, you get to the state capitol. And because they're there, they just figure out crap to do all the time because it's their full-time job. And that's the problem with regulators, that if you're there, what are you going to do? You got to prove your existence. So let's make up some more goofy laws. So.
Well, I had cut you off, Scott, before you were about to get into campaign stuff.
Sure.
Here's a question I've got. Let's say I run for office. I become Congressman Heaton. I do it for 6 years. I'm going to retire, and I have $400,000 in the Vote for Heaton. Why not? Heaton campaign fund from the Lizard People for Heaton Association of America. That's the name of my political action committee. So I've got like $400,000 in it. What do I do with that when I retire? Do I give it back to all the donors? Like, what happens to it?
Well, so let me go back. So in the 90s, when I first got elected, late 80s, 90s, when I got elected in 1990, it was the last cycle, the last time when members of Congress could convert their campaign funds to personal use if they were retiring. And so you had a lot of guys who were chairman.
Whoa, wait, what? Wait.
Yeah.
So if back then, I were running in Gomorrah, Oklahoma, where everybody knows me, and it's like 90% Whig party or whatever, and like it's a lock, I could just do fundraising for my absolutely faded campaign, and then I just keep it when I retire.
Yeah, you had to. I think you had to announce before some day in 1990 you weren't going to run for re-election in 92. At which point you can convert it. Now, keep in mind the Democrats had run Congress, I think the House at that time, since 1952. So it was a pretty safe bet that you could just hang around. But maybe it was 92 you had to do it, because a lot of them had they walked out the door, they would have gotten money. But all these old-timey Democrat chairmen all got wiped out in 94 when Republicans took control, and all of them had lost that option. And they had probably had $4 million in their reelection campaign, $3 million. Yeah. Now you can't do it. So if you leave the campaign office, you whatever money you have, you can use for sort of campaign government related stuff. So you can go to the Democratic convention and have all your expenses paid by your money that's left in your political action committee. Or you could distribute it to other candidates, or you could do things that are sort of related to that, or you can give it to charity, or you could like set up a scholarship at the University of Oklahoma to do it. You can't really use it for personal use. Although you can make the argument that going to the convention in, San Francisco and having a penthouse for 2 weeks is using it for your own personal use. But yeah. And there are people who have it that still have, like I have a friend of mine who still has money as an account, and he's been out of office for, he probably quit in like 2008. So he's got money that's been sitting somewhere for 14 years. And I don't know what he does with it. You have to file.
Can you use it as a vacation fund? Like from a tax perspective, let's say I really want to go to Disney World, but I do an episode on Epcot. I do an episode on Disney. That's a tax deductible expense for me. So can I go to Paris if I meet with a politician in Paris? I go look, it's me doing diplomacy. Yay.
Yeah, I mean, some of that stuff exists, and you could do it in stuff that's like, for years I was on the board of the German Marshall Fund, which fostered relationship with the U.S. and Europe when we still had allies, but that's another story. And, you could go to a conference that they were doing as long as it was something that had some quasi stuff to it, but you have to file annual expenses with the Federal Election Commission. And those are all, they pay attention, that's audited, everything else. Every member of Congress has to do that. So it would be really weird. I had one friend who interestingly later on got convicted and went to prison, but for another thing, but where he had a fund that was raised to give money back to kids in Indiana for scholarships and education stuff. And he never spent anything except things he spent money on. So he never got charged, but they sort of said, knock it off, So the answer is it can be your own private slush fund, but it's got strings attached to it. I mean, you can't buy a condo in Fort Lauderdale with your contributions or take a trip to Edinburgh. I mean, it's all forbidden.
Sure. So what I can really do with it, if I want to have a really, really nice time at the Libertarian National Convention in San Placenta, California next year, I can use it to book a really nice hotel there in San Placenta.
You can and throw a nice dinner for all of the people you want
Yeah.
to come to your dinner,
But
or go on a boat that you charter to go out in the bay to talk about libertarianism.
Okay, but I can't use it to like buy a car. I can't use it to put it in my retirement account. It sounds to me like the utility there would be, though, if I can give it to other campaigns, or can you give it to campaigns or political action committees? Yes. Like that sounds like that I would maintain a lot of capital that I could use for my own career ambitions. So there is something there.
There's a value if you're in the lobbying world, right? Because you then have a slush fund to give other candidates money, to give money to committees, to do all kinds of stuff if you want to do it. I'm not sure how many people really walk away with a lot of money these days. I think it was more common in the past, but like I said, I know some folks who I know still have money in their accounts, and it's like, what do you save it for? Maybe they just can't find candidates they want to give money to. But of course,
I've got a theory, by the way. My theory is, once you've tasted the sweet taste of running for office and you've gone into it, like if you have the personality type where you would enjoy meeting strangers in a diner and telling them funny anecdotes, which I very much do, I think it would be incredibly addictive. Of like, yep, every time I walk into a diner, I go to every booth and like, hey there, I'm Heaton, I'm from Gomorrah, Oklahoma. I'm like, oh, I like your belt, but I would love that shit. And so I think that every politician at the back of their mind has a like, maybe I'll run again. Like Anthony Weiner's running for office in New York City right now at this exact moment we're recording this. Anthony Weiner thinks he's got a shot. It's got to be addictive.
Well, I think what happens in my experience is people who left on their own when they wanted to are very happy. People who lost an election, it grates on them every single day. And you got to be competitive to want to run in the first place. And if you lose, and I have a good buddy of mine who got elected with a Democrat from Boise, and we both got elected in 90. And I think Larry, and I talk about an endangered species, a Democrat in Idaho these days, but he got beat in 94. So he served 2 terms, then got beat. He has run for state senate, state secretary of state, governor, senator. And it hasn't ever won since he got beat in 94. And it's like, Jesus, Larry, go do something else. Is it that important? Do you have a card that says you're elected to something? And I've done stuff with him for the State Department where you go out before U.S. elections and explain to people what's going on, how the Electoral College works and things like that. And Larry, every time he goes through this, well, and then I lost, and then I ran for, and then I ran for, and then I ran for, and it literally was, he's run like 8 more times for stuff. And it's like, people have always asked me, and it's like, oh Lord, I always view this as a window of public service, and I can't imagine why you'd want to stay in Congress for 30 years.
This is really helpful for me to know. If I ever do run for office and I lose, like immediately run for a really low tier office that I can get. Like that's like, so I'm in Congress, I get flushed out, run for like assistant city comptroller of a suburb. That way I'm like, I did it, I won, and then move on.
Yeah, there are people who try to make comebacks even for Congress, but I think once you lose, it's really hard to come back unless you just got beat in a fluke election, right? Because sometimes you have these wave elections like 94 was. There were a lot of very interesting people who got elected. You know, some guy who like ran a pizza store just because it was a year when the Republicans won everything, completely unqualified for whatever the office was. And they sort of lasted a term and then it washed back the other way. So, but now the problem is, which is another hour-long conversation, is that there are so few competitive districts because they've all been gerrymandered to make it. When I first ran for re-election, we had to throw money in a kitty, the Wisconsin Republicans did, to get somebody who was a computer programmer to do a program so we could divide up the congressional districts the way we wanted them to. Now you can buy off-the-shelf software, and I don't know what the difference is, but I think each congressional district has to be within 20 voters of the other congressional district. So it's turned into a science. And, in Wisconsin, there's maybe 2 competitive districts. And I think that's pretty common.
This is, I think, relevant to the whole campaign thing. So like going back to David Boren, my university president, he would bring up frequently that to at that time, this is back in like 2002 when I was at the university, 2003, he would say like, to run a successful Senate campaign, you need to raise $1 million a week or something like that. And if you're going to run a congressional campaign, you need to win, or you need to raise $1,000 a day. But it sounded horrible to me at the time. I still don't like it, but looking at it, when you have such uncompetitive districts where you just have to win the primary, and then in 90% of the congressional districts in America, you're safe. Once you've won the primary, you've won the war, and you're an incumbent, it's going to be real difficult to flush you out. You're still raising money. So I infer from that why you're raising money is not for yourself. It's to raise money that I give to the Republican steering committee or the Democratic National Committee, and that is how they allocate chairmanships. So I'm raising money in order to get myself a better committee position and a better chair if I can, and that's why we're raising money. Is that correct? Is that what guys are doing?
Well, two things. If you can build up a really big war chest, it discourages anybody from running against you. So if you've got $3 million in the bank and I decide I want to run against you for a congressional district back in Oklahoma,
got it. So there's a
deterrent.
deterrent.
I got to run pretty fast to get close to you. And so that's sort of part of it, of why they do it. The second thing is people just I always used to tell people, I'd have friends yell at me because we would give money out of our political committee to Republicans and Democrats. Republicans would be mad at me in the law firm because why are you giving to Democrats, and vice versa. And I'd say, look, at the present time, we're for the incumbent party, right? We never fund challengers. We'll support people who support us with issues that we work with. And so even if you've got a really safe district, you have to, you just need to, for self-protection, you need to keep raising money. I'll disagree with you that how much money you raise and give to the National Republican Congressional Committee or the Senate version. I know of cases where people who gave more money still lost the chairmanship because they weren't the best candidates. So it's not, given the choice,
it's not a one-to-one ratio.
A lot more money to the committees or not a lot more money. I'd always pay more money to the committees. But if people have questions about your leadership ability, you'll never get there. I mean, I served with a guy from California who tried forever to be the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee. And he never got anywhere just because people thought he was a pleasant guy, but a knucklehead, couldn't do it. So
when I had Justin Amash on a few years ago, he had said that was the principal issue, and how he would rectify it is just don't have chairmanships appointed by the speaker, have chairmanships elected by the committee. And that would remove there being a relationship between or it would do a lot to remove that relationship. Would you be in favor of that kind of system where committees elect their own chair? No, why not?
Because the speaker has to have command of the committee so that he can get stuff through. Especially if you're Mike Johnson today and you've only got a majority of 3, 4, 5, 6, you can't have chairman breaking off and sort of going broken field running to do whatever they want to do. And that's not to say that. Again, I think in the way that the president, I think in most cases, has the right to name people he thinks should be in the cabinet. And unless there's a major stumbling block that the Senate turns down, I think that's his call. In the same way that I think the speaker, in most cases, should be able to control who the committee committee chairs are, just because they need it in order to have some sense of discipline. When you get elected to Congress, there's really not much they can do for you if they don't like you. But they can remove your chairmanship. They really can't even take you off the committee because it takes a vote of a lot of people to do it. And so the system sort of protects independence among members, but the committee chairmanship, I do think you have to have discipline. It's so hard to get anything done. So,
we've got about 10 minutes left, so I'll kick myself if I don't talk to you about this. One of the things that's been floating around, I think justifiably, the last couple of years is stock picking in the United States Congress. Like Pelosi got scrutinized on this. Who was it? Senator Burr did a bunch of trades right before the coronavirus got bad. He claimed it was all publicly available knowledge. With Pelosi, I think what she's doing basically when she gets called out on this is go, look, all the trades I'm doing are publicly available knowledge, by which she means I am sitting in a committee. It's broadcast on C-SPAN. 8 people are watching it. And then the second I get out, I go make that stock choice. Let's assume that she's doing it by the letter of the law, but there's still a level of priority of information that she has that other people don't have that allow her to make that. Do you think that this is a problem? And would you have any laws in place to modify what congressmen can do in terms of buying stock?
So in between Tip O'Neill, who everybody knows, and Newt Gingrich, who became his speaker, when I first got elected, a guy named Tom Foley was the Speaker of the House. very nondescript guy. I think he was a Democrat from Eastern Washington, I think Spokane. He actually ended up getting beat in 94, which is why he wasn't the speaker after that. But there was a big issue back then with IPOs. So if a company is going to go public and it's a hot commodity, it's very hard to get very many shares. I meant, if I call my broker and say, can you give me 100 shares of this? I might have a chance. If I call and said, get me 5,000 shares, because when you first buy it, it's going to run up and you want to sell it quickly and then dump it. And Foley was doing that. He got disproportionate numbers of IPO shares in his account. They're just hard to get. So they banned that. It's very difficult now for members of Congress to be able to trade in IPOs. So that was a reform done in 91 or 92, whenever it was. Yeah, I do think there's an issue there because people do have inside knowledge. Well, again, everything you buy in your account is public knowledge. You have to sign a financial statement. So people would not necessarily know how much stock I have, but there are brackets. So I own 100 shares of AT&T, somewhere between 100 and 200. I own between 500 and 1,000 shares of U.S. Steel. There we are trading on U.S. Steel again. But so you can track where it is. There's been some suggestion, and a lot of people I think who are clean government types say that what you really should do is have your stuff in a trust managed by somebody else, and it has to stay in mutual funds and electronic traded funds. So you can pick winners and losers in sectors, but you can't pick individual stocks. I wouldn't have any problems with that whatsoever. I mean, they used to do this big thing. Most of the money I ever had for years was all in trusts for my kids because they needed it for college. And if it was in their names, they didn't have to pay taxes on it because they were too little to qualify for taxes at that point. There wasn't enough money in them. But I do think that sort of given, remember, again, this was an era back then where everything traded on the floor with day traders and people screaming in the pit and everything else. Now it's all done electronically, and it's less than a second for most trades to be executed.
I would be fine with that. I wouldn't have a problem with a member of Congress engaging in sectoral mutual funds, or alternately doing like index funds, because like an index fund, you're betting on the economy. I don't have any problem with that. I'm thinking that other things you could do, like the trust funds. Like I know Carter had a trust fund because we made him sell his farm when he became president. I think he must have done it voluntarily because I know that Trump has not done this. But Carter's farm was placed in a trust he didn't control. The trust went, makes sense to sell the farm. They sold his family farm. He couldn't do anything about it. In terms of members of Congress, other proposals that I could come up with I think maybe I'd be okay with members of Congress picking individual stocks, provided that they are required by law to announce the decision 1 week before the purchase. So that if you're like, I'm going to buy Viacom, no problem. You got to do it you got to announce it publicly 1 week in advance on a special website. And then you can do it. That way everybody else has a chance to catch up with you. Or alternately, you could do like a pre-clearance type thing where any stock purchases you do have to go through an ethical office that goes, is this something that you are personally governing, that you have a stake in? Are you buying stock in something that you're regulating? If yes, you have to clear it. You have to clear everything through the ethical office, and we will not allow you to purchase anything that looks like a conflict of interest.
Well, again, but in public record, we had to file, I should say, you have to disclose all of your holdings so you can see where it is. And it's not most garden variety members of Congress. And then I did come from a family trust fund with $12 million. A lot of those folks do put it in blind trust so they can't get actively involved and manage. I mean, if I think, people think members of Congress are wealthy when they're there, but I meant the reality is you've got to keep houses in two places, right? And then, you especially have two sets of housing expenses. Your travel to and from Washington today is now covered. It's part of your official expenses. So you get, when you fly from Madison to Washington or vice versa, it's part of the congressional budget office you have. But, a lot of folks really don't have a wide variety of assets. Now, the Senate's a different world, as you know. It's very hard to find anybody in the Senate, with the exception of maybe John Fetterman, and I guess Rand Paul was an eye surgeon, so I'm sure he's doing fine. But I meant most garden variety House members. If I think through the Wisconsin delegation, there's really nobody there who fits that right now. Herb Kohl, when he was there, Herb was a senator for years from Wisconsin, owned a big department store chain, and at one time a huge grocery store chain throughout the Midwest. And all of Herb's money, which I think was, when he died, might have been $900 million. That was all handled by a trust. So I think you see people with a lot of money do it just to be safe, but I think a lot of garden variety members. So
would you need, like, I would favor any of these. You can only buy index funds and mutual funds. I'm fine with that. If you want to buy individual stocks, I'd say if you want to buy individual stocks, you got to clear it with the ethics office so there's no conflict of interest, and it has to be announced a week in advance. So there are places that I would be okay with. But I could see people getting around it very quickly, where, like, I'm not doing it, but my spouse is, or I'm not doing it, but I call my 21-year-old son and go, by the way, you need to buy Viacom. Like, could there be provisions in place that if I'm elected to Congress, the stock options for my family is truncated? Is that something that's even legally permissible?
Yeah, well, I think if you transfer options, then you can have a taxable event. So you have to be careful about that sort of stuff. But I mean, I think as long as it's all disclosed, it's fine with me. And I don't know how you'd have a clearinghouse that would work. I mean, were there members of Congress over the weekend going, I probably don't want to own any of that Israeli defense stock anymore. Or maybe I do want to own more Israeli defense stock. So how are you going to file something on Monday morning by the time Friday rolls around? Maybe the company's headquarters got bombed. I mean, I think it's hard to sort of make it Mr. Anti-Regulatory. You're making it more regulatory than it needs to be. I do think the IPO was clearly a major abuse. And I think the public is smart enough to see this. Again, the people who tend to do a lot of this tend to be people with a lot of money, many of whom have very safe districts. So this isn't going to cause outrage among their constituents or anyway. I don't see protests against Nancy Pelosi breaking out in the streets of San Francisco. Not likely. So.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess part of it could just be more speed and transparency. They passed the Stock Act, I think, in 2012. I can't remember when they did that, but the Stock Act requires you, if you're a member of Congress, you have to post any stock transaction you make within 45 days, which is such a long time that I don't think it's particularly useful. But if you did it, the day of or something like that, that would at least make it more transparent. Or if you said members of Congress and family have to post transactions that they do or something like that.
Yeah. But my concern is that, I mean, who's going to go? I mean, does it practically get it done? Who's going to look at it? I mean, I was on a local bank board for years, and we had as many regulations as Chase Manhattan did, not, having redlining in the districts. I mean, it's small town Wisconsin outside of Madison, right? It's Stoughton, which is overrun by Norwegian immigrants. So, is there redlining in Stoughton? What, the Norwegians and the non-Norwegians? So part of this just gets into sort of minutia that if you're going to be a crook, you're going to figure out smart ways to do it. And trading 300 shares of AT&T, I don't think is where the real problem is.
Well, I will end it on that note. Scott, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this was, it was fun. I'm always glad to be here. Hopefully we'll do it one day in your favorite phone booth at the Royal Scots Club in Edinburgh, where you've called me from before. So
I would love that. If you're ever in Edinburgh, hit me up. I got bail money waiting for you, Scott.
It's a deal. Thanks.
Patrons, I have an assignment for you. Today you heard some of my policy proposals to try to minimize bad incentives in Congress. So you just heard me talking about things that I would do in terms of stock picking, either pre-clearance through an ethical committee or alternately having at least a week before you have to announce any stock that you might purchase a week in advance before you do so, or probably cleaner, just saying you can only buy index funds and mutual funds, stuff like that. I had a couple of proposals over the course of the episode. I would love to hear your policy prescriptions for minimizing corruption and conflicts of interest within the halls of power. I am going to read and respond to your ideas in this week's accompanying bonus episode. So, if you disagree with today's guest and you think there are indeed clear financial or vocational restraints that should affect members of Congress beyond what we talked about, alternately, maybe there are incentive mismatches that we just didn't bring up, we didn't have time to do it, and you think that there ought to be a law in place to stop members of Congress from doing X. I would love to hear any and all ideas. I would love to hear your policy proposals on how to make Congress less corrupt or how to get rid of bad incentive structures. That is going to be this week's bonus episode on the political orphanage. You can contribute to it and hear that episode by becoming a patron of the show. Go to thepoliticalorphanage.com. That's thepoliticalorphanage.com. That's the show. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Congressman Scott Klug, for coming on. Thank you, patrons who make it all possible. Until next time, I've been Andrew Heaton, and so have you.